فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا لا خائفا ولا وجنا مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك فإن أبط عني عتبتك بجهلي عليك ولعل الذي أبطى عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك علي يا ربي إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك وتتحبب إلي فتبغض إليك وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك كأن اليد تطول عليك فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك فارحم عبدك الجاهل وجد عليه في فضل إحسانك إنك جواد كريم الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح ديان الدين رب العالمين الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه وهو قادر على ما يريد الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالق الإصباح ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام الذي بعد فلا يرى وقربا فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله ولا شبيه يشاكله ولا ظهير يعاضده قهر بعزته الأعزى وتواضع لعظمته العظمى فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازي فكم من موهبة هنية قد أعطاني وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني وبهجة مونقة قد أراني فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه ولا يغلق بابه ولا يرد سائله ولا يخيب آمله الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاصم الجبارين مبين الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وعمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتهنأت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على صديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي. حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر، وحفه بملائكة المقربين، وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك، استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله، مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته عنه، أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا، يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به، وانصره وانتصر به، وانصره نصرا عزيزا، وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك، حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله، وتذل بها النفاق وأهله، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المم به شعثنا، واشعب به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وأعزز به ذلتنا، وأغن به عائلنا، واقض به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وآتنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وآتنا به فوق رغبتنا. يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين، اشف به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله وغيبة ولينا وكثرة عدونا وقلة عددنا وشدة الفتن بنا وتظاهر الزمان علينا فصل على محمد وآله وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله وبضر تكشفه ونصر تعزه وسلطان حق تظهره ورحمة منك تجللناها وعافية منك تلبسناها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعجل
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صل على محمد وآل محمد. الثاني على حب الحسن والحسين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. In the third and final salawat in honor of our master, the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, with the loudest of your voices, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صل على محمد وآل محمد. أحسنتم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, my dear brothers and sisters, my elders, Samahat al-Sayyid, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to begin by sending our condolences to the awaited Savior, Imam al-Mahdi. May Allah hasten his reappearance, to the Shia of Amir al-Mu'mineen worldwide, and to you all on the martyrdom of our master, our first Imam, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. Inshallah, tonight on the 20th night, it is a night where the Ahlul Bayt, and especially the orphans of the community, and everyone, as we are all the children of Amir al-Mu'mineen, are mourning the loss of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And tomorrow night, it will be the epitome where the world loses one of its greatest characters in Ali ibn Abi Talib. Inshallah, tonight and tomorrow night, we will continue to commemorate our master Ali ibn Abi Talib and try to do a tiny bit of justice. We cannot do justice to his name and to his legacy, but inshallah try our best to do as much as we're able in remembering this holy man. Inshallah, we will jump into the main event, but I have a couple of announcements before the lecture. We have merchandise available. There's a table right there on the side. Brother Mustafa can help you. We have special merchandise in honor of the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So that is very, inshallah, you can wear it tonight and tomorrow especially. And we also have general merchandise with the MYM logo. Prices is $55. They're sweaters, long crew necks, a long sleeve. You have $55 for members and $60 for non-members. Inshallah. Oh yeah. Let's recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for the amazing and generous people who sponsored tonight's iftar. Inshallah, with their help, we were able to have such an amazing iftar, and the help of the volunteers and the cooks. So let's remember their marhumeen, inshallah, your marhumeen, and the marhumeen of the cooks that worked tirelessly to make the iftar possible. Inshallah, we'll remember all of them with a Surah Al-Fatiha together. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Ahsantum. Inshallah, if you're interested, we still have some nights available for sponsorship. So please consider donating. Tomorrow night is the night of Qadr. It's a night of destiny, and you have an opportunity to, inshallah, cement a legacy for yourself and for your deceased in honor of Ali ibn Abi Talib, in honor of the Ahlul Bayt. So inshallah, you have a chance to feed the mu'mineen. You have a chance to sponsor such a wonderful program. Our sponsorships are not limited to just iftar. You get to sponsor the hall and all the other related expenses that come with this program. So inshallah, if you are able, you can reach out to Brother Ali Samak. You don't have to do a full sponsorship. Any amount helps. Any donation helps. Brother Ali Samak can help you with sponsorships. Brother Jawad can help you with general donations, inshallah. We have a fundraiser night coming up on Friday night as well. And inshallah, you can always pledge your donation beforehand. So on the night of destiny is a night of charity. Tomorrow night you can give the pledge and at least get the thawab of that pledge. And then you can, inshallah, raise your hand during the fundraiser if you would like as well. But inshallah, you have many opportunities to give, and the reward is tenfold during these holy nights. Inshallah, without further ado, we will jump into the main event of tonight with Samahat Sayyid Mahdi al-Modaresi. Tonight's topic is Muawiyah, the epitome of hypocrisy. So inshallah, with that, we will welcome Samahat Sayyid. All the brothers, I want you to come as forward as possible. So everyone do stand up in welcoming Samahat Sayyid with 3 loud salawats ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصل اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد اللهم صل على وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري فداه أرواح العالمين. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. For the hastening of the reappearance of the Master, the Savior, the Avenger, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari, recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. There's an expression in the Arabic language that states al-umuru tu'rafu bi-adadadiha. In English, you could express that as things are known by their opposites. Darkness, when it envelops everything, that is when you truly appreciate light. The standard English idiom that corresponds to this, however, is contrast brings clarity. Which is why, if I wanted to describe someone to you who's extremely generous, and I said that this person donated an X amount of money to charity, or that this person gave his house for someone who's homeless. Now, that in itself is usually enough to depict a clear picture about the generous nature of this individual. However, if I then added more information and said that this generous individual lived in a time full of scarcity, full of poverty, and that no one else ever donated to anybody because they felt that they didn't have enough to sustain themselves, suddenly this person acquires a newfound shine because he is a glimmer of light in a time of utter darkness. And so the contrast that such a description creates is what allows the individual in question and his or her virtues to become crystal clear. This is the reason that when we speak about the virtues of the Ahlul Bayt, the family of God's holy messenger, his progeny, his kindred, we sometimes, not always, but sometimes feel the need to describe their enemies. When speaking about their enemies and their vices and their inability to exhibit any kind of virtue whatsoever, sometimes that's what it takes so that people begin to appreciate the true value of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. The reason I say that sometimes we have no choice but to do this is that it's an injustice to the Ahlul Bayt for us to compare them to anyone. And that's why in the English language we have a useful tool. Instead of comparison, we say we are contrasting them, right? Comparison might suggest that while one is excessively generous, the other is less generous. Whereas what we're doing here is showing how one side, epitomized by the family of the Holy Messenger of God, and of course that includes him, they represent and embody and epitomize the most pristine virtues ever exhibited in a mortal being, while the other side is completely and utterly devoid of any virtues whatsoever. Therefore, it's an exercise in contrast rather than an exercise in comparison. And yet, sometimes we still have to do it. Again, it is a kind of disservice to the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, but in order to clarify things, we feel the need to do this. For example, when I say to you that Marwan ibn al-Hakam sought refuge with Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein, Zayn al-Abidin, alayhim as-salam, and asked the Imam to protect his family, his women, his children, that's an incredible virtue for someone to offer, to look after the women and the children of another person. But when you realize who Marwan ibn al-Hakam was, what kind of vile creature this person was, only then do you begin to appreciate what Imam Zayn al-Abidin did and to whom. To whom? Marwan ibn al-Hakam's role in the murder of Rasulullah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Hasan, as well as Imam al-Hussein, is well documented. He was the one who told the governor of Medina when Imam al-Hussein was summoned in the dead of night in order to offer his pledge of allegiance to Muawiya, and Imam al-Hussein refused, saying, "Nusbihu wa tusbihun wa nara wa tarawun." Let's leave it until the daytime, then we'll figure out which direction to take. Marwan told the governor, you have to kill him right now, because if he refuses to offer the pledge, now you will never get a hold of him. And there was an altercation between Imam al-Hussein and Marwan in that meeting. This is Marwan, al-Wazagh ibn al-Wazagh. He was truly, the best description for him was the one given to him by Rasulullah, the lizard, a filthy animal. And yet this man comes to Imam Zayn al-Abidin when he was in trouble, when he was being hunted down and had acquired the wrath of the government. He came to the Imam and said to him, "Would you look after my wife and my kids?" And the Imam agreed. See, now this notion of generosity, compassion, caring for the other acquires a whole new meaning. Another example of that is when you examine the conduct and the actions of Bani Umayyah against not just their foes and their enemies, but against women and children. Their heartless characters were born naked on the day of Ashura. And what they did to the 6-month-old infant of Imam al-Hussein, to the daughters of Imam al-Hussein, this is what Bani Umayyah did. But then you come across Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who addressed his own horse when he reached the water and said, "Anta atshan wa ana atshan." I won't drink until you do. Allahu Akbar. The Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, as I said, embodied and epitomized and personified values that are almost superhuman. They're not superhuman in the sense that we can follow in their footsteps, but they were so unique and unparalleled that you'd think only they are capable of doing this. The contrast brings clarity in this case. Another example is, you hear that Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam was seated beside the caliph of the day, al-Ma'mun al-Abbasi, when Imam al-Ridha had been appointed against his will, I might add, as the heir to the throne and the successor of the Khalifa. Then they began to purge those closest to Muhammad al-Amin, his brother that Ma'mun killed in order to assume the throne, as well as their father Harun al-Abbasi. There was a purge, as there's always a purge. You know, when a new administration comes, they have to get rid of all the old guard, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And part of the purge that they brought the most notable personalities who were close to Harun and Muhammad al-Amin, and they were being executed one after the other. There was a summary trial for each one, just a couple of questions, and they were led down to the choppers. So they bring a man by the name of Jaludi. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, as soon as he sees this individual, he whispers in the ear of Ma'mun. Al-Jaludi doesn't hear what the Imam said, but what the Imam said to him was, Habli hadha al-ghulam. Release this person for my sake. Don't kill him. So far, so good. It's an act of kindness. No question, the Imam tried to save somebody's life. That person, once you get to know him, contrast brings clarity. It tells you how generous the Imam was being when he made this gesture. Because Jaludi was the head of a contingent of troops that was sent to the house of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam at night by orders from the Khalifa Harun in order to ransack his home. He came and the Imam pleaded with him, don't come with your troops into my house. I have women, I have children. You will terrorize them, you will terrify them. And he refused. Now when the tables have turned, Jaludi is at the receiving end of the persecution. He is brought forth to serve, to have justice served and to be executed for his crimes. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam says, it's okay, let him go for me. Al-Jaludi, I might add this out of, if you're curious or interested, didn't hear what the Imam told Ma'mun. He assumed that the Imam was asking Ma'mun to have him executed because he knew what he had done. And so he told Ma'mun, do not listen to this man. Ma'mun said, sure enough, I won't listen to him because he just pleaded with me to save you, to release you, to pardon you, but I shall not do that. Have him executed. Send him to the guillotine. When you examine the contrast, that's when things come into sharp clarity. And you begin to appreciate who the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam were. And I should also add that these examples that I mentioned and cited are but a handful out of literally thousands of examples. All you need to all you need to do rather is to read any history book, not even Shia history books. Read At-Tabari, read Ibn Kathir, read others. Because as much as there is garbage and poison embedded in those books, there is still quite a lot that you can use to create this sense of contrast. And this is why we need to examine the life and the actions of Muawiya. As much as it saddens me to have to mention the name of this vile creature on the pulpit of Rasulullah, where the remembrance of the Ahlul Bayt is upheld. But when you get to know who Muawiyah was, you begin to, number one, appreciate Amirul Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and his actions. And you also begin to acquire a newfound sense of disassociation and bara'ah. Because one of the things that we're meant to do is to strengthen our bara'ah. That is why on a night like the one that passed, one of the recommended acts for which you are rewarded greatly is to curse the killers of Ali ibn Abi Talib. To say 100 times, Allahumma al'an qatalata amir al-mu'mineen. Not the killer, even though there was only one individual involved. The person who assassinated Amir al-Mu'mineen in the niche of prayer in Masjid al-Kufa was Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam al-Muradi. Why do we say it in the plural then? Why qatalata Amir al-Mu'mineen? Because even though Ibn Muljam was the agent who executed Amir al-Mu'mineen, there were many, many others involved. There was an entire network led by none other than Muawiyah. Muawiyah was the one who orchestrated the plan. Muawiyah was the one who supplied the poison. In fact, studies have been conducted to show that it wasn't so much the strike on the head, the blessed head of Amir al-Mu'mineen, that killed him, but the poison that spread throughout his body. It was the kind of poison that only Muawiyah could get his filthy hands on. A poison imported from the Roman emperor himself. So you strengthen your bara'ah, and that is critical, brothers and sisters. As much as we have to acquire tawalli towards the Ahlul Bayt, towards Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, tabarri is equally important because it creates clarity, because there's no room for ambiguity anymore. In fact, the litmus test for whether or not someone follows the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam isn't how much they claim to love the Ahlul Bayt, because who doesn't? Even Ibn Taymiyyah says, I have no problems with the Ahlul Bayt, I love the Ahlul Bayt. Ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, these sworn nasibis, these enemies of God and the Messenger and of humanity, they proclaim love for the Ahlul Bayt openly. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, in fact, and I've mentioned this many times, he says that my lineage goes back to Ja'far, and we spoke about him, Ja'far al-Kadhab, a couple of nights ago. Ja'far ibn Ali al-Hadi, all the way back to Rasulullah. And so he says, I don't hate the Ahlul Bayt. I might hate their followers, and we have scores to settle in Karbala and Najaf, he says. But as far as the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt are concerned, I have no problems with him. So the litmus test for allegiance to the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam isn't your proclaimed loyalty or love or affinity towards them. It is whether or not you have bara'ah. Ibn Arabi says on numerous occasions in his book that I love the Ahlul Bayt. I love Ali ibn Abi Talib. In fact, he says, I believe in the Mahdi. But does he have bara'ah from the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt? Absolutely not. In fact, he has more respect for the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt than he does for the Ahlul Bayt. So, the contrast has to be made crystal clear. In fact, the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, Amir al-Mu'mineen notably, ensured that this contrast was as bold and saturated and clear as daylight. I'll give you one example and move on. When they came to Amir al-Mu'mineen, listen to this, and they said to him that Talha and Zubayr have set out to assemble an army to fight you, and they have a secret weapon, a weapon of mass destruction called Aisha. Now, when you bring Aisha into the equation, suddenly this is going to cause mass confusion. The wife of Rasulullah and the wives of the Prophet were given prominence during the reign of the first Khulafa. They were given positions that made people assume that these are the true family of Rasulullah. Who's the family of the Prophet? It is Aisha, it is Hafsa. Who's the family of the Prophet? It is Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. It is Ibn al-Abbas, which is why historians say that there is not a single instance where people in Medina came to Imam al-Hasan or Imam al-Hussein to ask them a question, whether it's on theology or jurisprudence. Can you believe you have the two grandsons of Rasulullah in your midst and nobody ever bothers to ask them a single question? Why? Because they used to go to Ibn Abbas. Why Ibn Abbas? Because Ibn Abbas was given that position of authority. He was honored by the Khulafa so as to outshine the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. When somebody goes to Sham, and he says that I'm shocked at these people. When I ask them, do you know the Ahlul Bayt? They say, of course we know the Ahlul Bayt. And then I say to them, well, why do you curse Ali ibn Abi Talib? They say, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he's got nothing to do with the Prophet. He's not a member of his household. So who are the Ahlul Bayt? They would respond by saying, Muawiyah. Muawiyah and Bani Umayyah, they're the relatives of the Prophet. لا نعلم غير معاوية وبني أمية أهل بيت لرسول الله. So this is part of the plan that was orchestrated by the Khulafa and later on by Muawiyah to replace the Ahlul Bayt with others. Because you can't erase the Ahlul Bayt. Their name is right there in the Holy Quran in plain text. So they came to Amir al-Mu'mineen. They told him that this group is taking Aisha with them, and that's going to confuse a lot of people. Ibn Abbas had a suggestion for the Imam, and it's a very smart one if you think about it. He said to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, they took Aisha, why don't you take Salama? One for one. They have a wife of the Prophet, so do we. And if there's going to be anyone who says, the wife of Rasulullah is in this camp, we'll say, well, so is another wife of Rasulullah in the other camp. And that'll help you execute your plans, defeat the enemy, and do so without much difficulty. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam said, absolutely not. This is what differentiates Amir al-Mu'mineen and the Ahlul Bayt from everybody else. There's a lesson in this for all of us, brothers and sisters. I remember many years ago, I heard an interview with someone who holds the chair of Islamic studies at a prestigious university in the UK. I won't mention his name. And it was on the BBC. The interviewer said to this guest of hers, who's supposed to be an expert on the topic of Islam, early Islamic history, Islamic jurisprudence, and so on. She said to him, you just mentioned that Ali wasn't able to hold the reins of power for too long. His entire government, his entire term, if you like, lasted 3.5 years almost. Why is that? His response showed a clear lack of understanding of the most basic and fundamental character traits of Amir al-Mu'mineen, despite his academic accolades. That's why I always say, studying Islamic sciences at university will not qualify you for any position, not even to lead a congregational prayer. You need to go to the Hawza. You need to study under esteemed scholars and jurists. A certificate from some Western university doesn't qualify you to speak on Islam whatsoever. His response was that I think Ali lacked political finesse. In other words, he wasn't skilled at politics. He lacked knowledge of how the game is played. He doesn't know how to run a government so as to prolong his reign. And I remember my immediate reaction then was this. I thought, subhanallah, you're an expert on Islam and you've never read Nahj al-Balagha. What have you been doing this whole time? Amir al-Mu'mineen clearly, unambiguously says, Wallah ma Muawiyah bi adha minni. I swear to God, Muawiyah isn't smarter than me. ولكنه يغدر ويفجر قد يرى الحول القلب وجه الحيلة. He says, I know exactly how the game is played. I can do what Muawiyah is doing. I can threaten certain segments of the community, and I can entice other segments of the community, and I can use all manner of immoral ways in order to subdue my enemies. Pay this one, bribe that one, scare this one, tell this one you're going to marry him off to your daughter. Focus on the tribal leaders. Avoid the ones that are inconsequential. Give them positions of authority. give them certain appointments in your administration. You can win everyone over. Everybody has a price tag. Ali ibn Abi Talib clearly says, I know how it's done. Wallah inni a'lamu bidaikum wa dawaikum, walakin hayhat. I know what your disease is, he says to his people, and I know what the cure is as well. I have the cure. But I will not straighten you up by ruining my own afterlife. If the community decides to rise up against you as they did with Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Khawarij, they used to come and stand behind Amir al-Mu'mineen in congregational prayers and curse him. They used to chant slogans against the Imam and accuse him of apostasy. And Amir al-Mu'mineen wouldn't even look back. And if some of his companions tried to confront them, he would say, stop. Stop. You won't be able to do anything. This is an endemic. It's a disease. It's not something you can eradicate by killing a few people here and there. And that's in addition to the fact that Amir al-Mu'mineen didn't want innocent lives to be destroyed. He didn't want innocent blood to be spilled. The Imam would say that you think that by killing these 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 people, you will eradicate the Khawarij. You'll never be able to do that, because they will remain في أصلاب الرجال وأرحام النساء إلى يوم القيامة. This ideology, this philosophy of hatred towards the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam will always be around until the day of judgment, in the backs of fathers and the wombs of mothers. So the Imam, when he was advised to take Salama, he said no. He then went to Salama. Salama offered. I mean, if the issue was that how could you take someone against their will, someone like Salama, then this was resolved in the meeting that took place right after. Amir al-Mu'mineen went to Salama. She said to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Wallah, I swear to God, had it not been for the fact that Rasulullah commanded his wives to remain in their homes, and this was an injunction in the Holy Quran, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَ تَبَرُّجَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ الْأُولَى. Had it not been for that, I would have been the first to come and join you and fight for you. Salamullahi ala Salama. So Amir al-Mu'mineen said to her, good, may God bless you. Obey the commandment of Rasulullah. Remain in your home. She then said to him, but I will offer my son, whose name was Amr ibn Abi Salama. She said, I'll send my son to fight on my behalf. The Imams of the Ahlul Bayt ensured that this contrast was always very, very clear by upholding values, by ensuring that divine commandments and injunctions were honored and respected. That's what made them shine. That's what made them stand out from everybody else. They had values, they had principles. A classic example of that, which I don't want to get into, is the issue of access to water in Siffin. You've all heard it, where they told Amir al-Mu'mineen, let's cut off access to the water from the army of Muawiya. The Imam said, no, we can't do that. This is water. It's an essential component of life. Yes, we're here to fight them, but I'm here to guide them first and foremost. That's why the Imam kept delaying and prolonging the period prior to the war being sparked by Muawiya. He kept delivering sermon after sermon to them to try and guide them. His objective wasn't to kill. Who could have done a better job at killing than Ali ibn Abi Talib? The one who defeated the greatest warriors of the Arabs. It was easy. That was the easy way out for Ali, to fight and to kill. But he chose not to do that. And famously told Malik al-Ashtar in that same battle of Siffin, when they say that Malik al-Ashtar asked the Imam, how many people have you killed? And the Imam gave him a number. He then thought to himself, just to himself, Well, I've killed the same number. How does that make any sense? It doesn't add up. Me and Ali ibn Abi Talib, the same strength, the same skills. And so it was at that moment that Amir al-Mu'mineen told him, he said, you kill indiscriminately, whereas I look at that person and probe his soul. And I look at his entire lineage. If there is anybody in 40 generations that will come from that man who's worth saving, I spare his life. This was Ali ibn Abi Talib. And yet for him to have this advantage, to have the upper hand and say, no, give them access to the water, only to then have Muawiyah do that to him and his army. Because the contrast has to become clear. And in fact, a lot of these things, people say, well, why didn't Amir al-Mu'mineen continue the battle all the way to the end? Why did he summon Malik al-Ashtar to return even though he was just a stone throw away from Muawiyah's tent and could have killed him and ended this misery and this disease from the face of history forever to come? A lot of these questions that people ask, or why did Imam al-Hussein go here? Why did he not do that? So on and so forth. All these questions are answered with a very, very simple response, which is that history needs to take its course. Ambiguities need to be clarified. Confusions need to be removed. This is a test. It was a test back then. It's still a test now. It's still a test. You must have heard by now. $100 million invested. How much of it was embezzled, God knows. But $100 million invested in a series about Muawiyah. Muawiyah. Had it been someone more obscure, someone whose vile nature wasn't as clear, someone that you could somehow defend and justify their actions. But Muawiyah. And who was Muawiyah? Amir al-Mu'mineen says on numerous occasions, including in his famous sermon Al-Fadakiyyah, he says, فَلَمَّا مَضَى فُلَانٌ إِلَى سَبِيلِهِ جَعَلَهَا فِي جَمَاعَةٍ زَعَمَ أَنِّي أَحَدُهُمْ. When the second Khalifa died, he then placed the issue of succession to the Khilafah in a group of people, and he claimed that I was one of the council of 6. Then the Imam says, فَمَتَى اعْتَرَضَ الرَّيْبُ فِيَّ بِالْأَوَّلِ مِنْهُمْ حَتَّى صِرْتُ أُقْرَنَ إِلَى هَذِهِ النَّظَائِرِ. He said, when was I ever able to be compared with the first one, let alone these ones? He says in another hadith that's attributed to him, Ibn Abi al-Hadid mentions this in Sharh al-Nahj. He says, Amir al-Mu'mineen used to say, كنت على عهد رسول الله كجزء من رسول الله. Whenever the Prophet was seen, Ali ibn Abi Talib was with him. I was always part of Rasulullah. وكانوا ينظرون إلي كما ينظر الناس إلى الكواكب في أفق السماء. People used to look at me as though they're looking at a planet on the farthest horizon of the sun. You know, when someone is so great, someone is so lofty, so prestigious, you'd never even think about getting close to him, let alone being compared to him, right? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, that was me. فَلَمْ يَرْضَ لِيَ الدَّهْرُ بِذَلِكَ حَتَّى أَرْذَلَنِي. But the times wasn't content with that. And so I was brought down so many levels, حَتَّى صِرْتُ أُقْرَنَ بِابْنِ هِنْدٍ. To the point that people started comparing me to who? Not Muawiyah. He doesn't mention him by his first name. He mentions him by his family tree. He says, the son of Hind, وَابْنِ الْبَاغِيَةِ. Isn't it enough if someone was constructing a biography of Muawiyah to simply say Muawiyah ibn Hind, full stop, end of discussion? Do we need to say any more than that? Who was Hind? Where do I begin? Especially in a majlis honored by these luminous faces, by brothers and sisters who are mu'mineen. I exalt you. You're too honorable for me to talk about the actions and the character of someone like Hind bint Utbah. Suffice to say, just a couple of things. Number one, she chewed on the limbs of Hamza. Not only did she order Hamza to be killed by Wahshi, la'natullahi alayhi. I don't know why some people say, oh, Wahshi became good later on, the Prophet pardoned him. Pardon him what? He killed Hamza. The Prophet excommunicated him. He told him to leave, to go. And the Prophet wouldn't do that to a believer, as is stated in the Holy Quran. But she sent Wahshi to kill Hamza. Then she ordered Hamza to be mutilated. Who does that? Is a human being capable of tearing up the body of another human being no matter how much you hate them? The mafia doesn't do this. She tore up his chest with her dagger. She took out a chunk of his heart, a chunk of his liver, and she mutilated his face, his ears, his nose. She ate a bite from his liver. Then she took the other limbs that she had mutilated and she created a necklace out of it. This is Hind, the killer of the uncle of Rasulullah, Asadullah wa Asadu Rasulih. Sayyidu Shuhada al-Ummah, before Imam al-Hussein. That title belonged to Hamza. So this was his mother. And if that wasn't enough, historians say that Muawiya, when he was born, there was a dispute between at least 4 and up to 6 individuals over paternity. Imagine that. This is more like a Jerry Springer show than an academic. Honestly, this is what turns an academic, scholarly discussion about Muawiyah into something as comical and ridiculous as that. Imagine 4 people saying that he's my son. No, he's my son. No, he's my son. One of them was a man by the name of Ammar ibn al-Walid ibn Utbah. He was one of the claimants of paternity for Muawiyah. The other person was Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. The third was a singer who worked for Ammara. He was his personal entertainer / singer. His name was Sabah. Now, the fourth was Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan, historians say, was incredibly ugly and fat and short and just, all the features that normally are not considered desirable. And so Hind was always reluctant to claim him as the father. He wasn't even her husband, by the way, at the time. Right? So instead, what happened was, one day she called Sabah, that singer, who happened to be handsome and good looking and whatnot, as singers usually are, comes with a package. They're filthy to the core, but they look nice and people go crazy over them. And so she called him one day to her private quarters. She did the deed, and God knows, again, unfortunately we don't have access to DNA information, so we don't know who the real father is, but it was most likely not Abu Sufyan. Again, he wasn't the husband of Hind. Hind was, again, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So, this was Muawiyah in terms of his background. This person then goes on to do so many vile things in his life, not least of which was the fact that he ordered Amir al-Mu'mineen to be cursed atop 30,000 pulpits for 80 years. Imagine attending a Friday sermon only to have the one delivering that sermon begin by cursing Amir al-Mu'mineen. And often, not being content with Amir al-Mu'mineen's cursing, they would curse Fatima al-Zahra, al-Hasan, al-Hussein as well. For 80 years. Subhanallah. Al-Shaheed Al-Thalith, who was in India and Hyderabad, if I'm not mistaken at the time, was killed by the order of the king because some of these individuals who hated the Shia, they went to him and they said, this person said, Aliyun salawatullahi alayh. Sallu alayhi wa alayh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajjal faraj. Allahumma salli ala Amir al-Mu'mineen wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin. So someone who praises Ali is executed for that crime. But Muawiya, who cursed Ali for 40 years, nobody ever objected. No one ever said, why do you do this? You say that the Shia are kuffar because they curse the Sahaba. Fine, whether that's true or not, we can have a discussion about it. But Muawiya cursed Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was also a Sahabi, or not? Al-Qubaysi, who was an Iraqi scholar, but is at times quite honest and fair in his assessment. He says, they told me who is the best Sahabi, and I didn't mention Ali ibn Abi Talib. So they said to me, Ali ibn Abi Talib is not one of the, he's not considered one of the good Sahabi. And so he said, no, you misunderstood me. Ali ibn Abi Talib wasn't a Sahabi. Ali ibn Abi Talib was a member of the Ahlul Bayt. They're above and beyond any so-called Sahabi. Ali ibn Abi Talib is cursed for 80 years. Nobody objects to that. Then make an entire series worth $100 million about Muawiyah, glorifying him, justifying his actions, portraying him in a good light. I'm actually, for one, I'm happy they made the series because it gives us a chance to talk about Muawiyah. Many pulpits around the Shia world now are busy talking about Muawiyah. We get to discuss him, we get to discuss his mommy, we get to discuss his daddy, we get to discuss, just expose everything, bring it all to light. I'm thankful for the series because here's the thing, let's be honest. Those who love Muawiyah, I'm not talking about the lay people, I'm not talking about the ones who can't tell their right hand from their left hand, and there's plenty of those. But those who are learned, the so-called scholars, right? We had a difficult time prior to this proving that these individuals were just plain arrogant. They're not ignorant, they're arrogant. They would reject the Quran itself. Wallahi alladhi la ilaha illahu. If Rasulullah came to them and said that Muawiyah is a deviant, imposter, and a charlatan, and a hypocrite, they would reject Rasulullah, but not Muawiyah. You might say, that's a bit of a stretch. Come on. If Rasulullah told them, surely they'd accept it. But Rasulullah did tell them. And he said it in no ambiguous terms. Enter Exhibit A, and the only exhibit, by the way, so inshallah we won't take too long. Hadith al-Fi'atul Baghiyah. You've heard this hadith, I'm sure. Any book of hadith, of history, that's worth the ink it's printed with, includes Hadith al-Fi'at al-Baghiyah. You name it, it's there. Bukhari, Muslim, Nasibis like Dhahabi, they all mention this hadith. In other words, it's reached the status of tawatur, meaning it's a hadith that's so famous and so highly cited that nobody rejects it. Nobody questions its authenticity. What does the hadith say? Is it ambiguous? Is it difficult to understand? Absolutely not. I'll give you one example before I mention hadith al-Fi'a al-Baghiyah. Al-Baladhiri, who is a Sunni historian and orator of hadith, narrator of hadith, he mentions in his book a hadith in which Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, you're all familiar with Amr ibn al-As, his son Abdullah, he narrates that I was sitting with Rasulullah one day and a group of other Muslims when the Holy Prophet said, يَدْخُلُ مِن تِلْكَ الْفَجَّةِ رَجُلٌ يَمُوتُ عَلَى غَيْرِ مِلَّتِي. A man is going to step through that door who will die as a non-Muslim. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As said that I became so nervous as if I was busting and needed to go to the bathroom. Because my father had gone to do wudu and I was afraid that he would be the one who steps in. So he says, I waited there hoping my dad wouldn't be the one about whom Rasulullah is speaking. Suddenly, dakhala Muawiyah. In other words, Rasulullah is saying, this person will die as a non-Muslim. Whether he was a Muslim to begin with is a problem like his fraternity test. But we know for a fact, Rasulullah is saying he will die as a non-Muslim. Right? You should see the theological gymnastics they've played with this hadith. So they've tried to sort of pick out flaws in the chain of transmission. It's not there. There's only one person in the chain of transmission who they say imamun fil hadith. He was a giant, an expert in hadith. وَلَكِنَّ فِيهِ تَشَيُّعٌ. But there are things he says, especially when it comes to his hadiths that he narrates against Muawiya, which leads us to think that he might be a secret Shia. Because for once this guy was honest. But anyway, regardless, this hadith is mentioned in so many other sources. Get this, without mentioning the guy's name who walks in. Imagine that's the whole point. سيدخل من ذلك الفج رجل يموت على غير ملتي. Then all of the narrators say فدخل رجل. So a guy walked in, some ambiguous, obscure person. Nobody knows his name. Isn't that the whole point? Shouldn't you forget every other detail, including the fact that you were busting and needed to go to the bathroom, but remember this guy's name so everyone knows him? That's what we're dealing with, brothers and sisters. Absolute arrogance. Which is why I say if Rasulullah himself came, they would throw the Prophet out. If God himself revealed a verse in the heavens, they would reject it, they would deny it. So, Exhibit A was Hadith al-Fi'at al-Baghiyah. Look at how clear this is. Bukhari, Muslim, etc., all mention it. The Holy Prophet is quoted to have said, وَيْحَ عَمَّارٍ. Woe unto Ammar. This is often to denote a feeling of sorrow. Rasulullah is saying, I feel sorry for Ammar. The words, by the way, even if you're not an Arab, I think you'll find them to be clear enough. وَيْحَ عَمَّارٍ تَقْتُلُهُ, which means someone will kill him. الْفِئَةُ, which means a group. الْبَاغِيَةُ, which means those who are the aggressors. So far, so good. This isn't Mawla, so that you could say, but Mawla has like 27 different meanings. We don't know which one the Prophet meant. Right? This is as clear as it comes. تَقْتُلُهُ الْفِئَةُ الْبَاغِيَةُ. Then the Holy Prophet clarifies even further. In the Bukhari version, it says, يَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ. In all the other version, it says, يَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ وَيَدْعُونَهُ إِلَى النَّارِ. Is that clear enough? He will be killed by the aggressors. He will call upon them to paradise. They will call upon him to what? An-nar, hellfire. Now, as clear as this is, there's another important point to add to make it even clearer. Go to Surah Al-Qasas in the Holy Quran, verse number 41 to 42. And just find out, just Google this on your own, what Allah says about أَئِمَّةً يَدْعُونَ إِلَى النَّارِ. So you can find out for yourself whether we can curse Muawiya or not. If Allah curses him in the Quran, I will curse him. And if you object about us cursing the so-called companions, reject the Quran. Because right there in Surah Al-Qasas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَدْعُونَ إِلَى النَّارِ. Subhanallah. Many of the stories in the Quran, and I want you to think about this when you read the Holy Book of Allah. Many of the stories, you might think to yourself, are irrelevant if they are separated from the hadith of Rasulullah. The story of Nuh, the Quran tells us all these details about him and his people and the ark, and how the ark was the only means of salvation. Even his son tried to seek refuge in a mountaintop, but Nuh told him that you'll never be able to find refuge. The only way is to board my ark. All of that is so that Rasulullah then comes and tells us, إِنَّمَا مَثَلُ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي كَسَفِينَةِ نُوح من ركبها نجا ومن تخلف عنها غرق وهوى. This story is about Fir'aun and his people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we have made them into leaders who call people upon the hellfire, which is exactly what Rasulullah is saying. يدعوهم إلى الجنة ويدعونه إلى النار. Then in verse number 42 in Surah Al-Qasas, Allah says, so we then gave them la'na in this dunya, and on the day of judgment they will be the most hideous of people. It's as clear as daylight, but they'll still say, كانت فتنة. Oh, it was a disagreement between the companions. 40,000 people were killed. A disagreement? A disagreement is what you have with your son on whether or not he should eat more vegetables at dinner time. That's a disagreement. It's about what you have with your wife when you disagree on which vacation spot to pick for your next holiday. A disagreement isn't about getting 40,000 people killed. It was a disagreement. هل كان علي على الحق ومعاوية على باطل؟ لا نلوم أحد, they say. We say Ali ibn Abi Talib was a good man, but so was Muawiya. يدعونه إلى النار, the Prophet says. So who killed Ammar then? It doesn't get clearer than this. Muawiya killed Ammar. Of course, they tried to twist it, and they said that the one who killed Ammar was the one who brought him to the battle. It was Ali ibn Abi Talib, it was his fault. Ali ibn Abi Talib was using Ammar as a human shield. That's the problem. So Amir al-Mu'mineen responds. He says, if I'm the one who killed Ammar because I brought him along with me to the battle, then Rasulullah was the one who killed Hamza because he took him to battle with him. Anyway, this was Muawiyah, and a person whose filth, a person whose vile nature was so clear. He tried to hide it, by the way. He tried so much. Amir al-Mu'mineen has a hadith in which he says, لا يموت ابن هند, the son of Hind won't die, حتى يعلق الصليب في عنقه, which is a reference to the hadith of Rasulullah. He will hang a cross around his neck, and then he will die. In other words, when the Prophet said he will die on, not on my religion, he won't be a member of my faith, Amir al-Mu'mineen clarifies. He says he will die as a Christian, not because he found Jesus, but because Muawiyah found a legitimate way to express his pagan tendencies through Christianity. Plus, he relied on the Roman emperor for support and for help. His own son Yazid, you know, Yazid's mother was a Christian, and she even took him to Constantinople. She took him to her Christian villages for the first few years of his life to be raised as a Christian. Not a true, genuine Christian who follows Isa ala nabiyina wa alihi wa alayhi salam, but as someone who found a conduit towards paganism through Christianity. This is Muawiyah. And yet he tried to hide it. When he was about to die, he told the people of Sham. He always played the part. That's why I said he's the quintessential hypocrite. Because in Sham, he acted and conducted himself in a certain way. In Medina, he conducted himself in a certain way. For example, I'll just give you these. In Medina, he was ultra-conservative. One day, he was seen saying, Wa Islam, Islam has perished. Our religion is gone. No one's applying it. Why? What's happened? Did they elect number one or number two as the Khalifa? No. Because women are wearing their hijab in such a way that you can see the hair tied up from underneath the hijab. So over here, he's like, Islam is extinct because of how women are wearing their hijab. That's how conservative I am. He's the halal police. In Sham, he's a lot more conservative. He's all about love and peace and that sort of stuff. And then when he's about to die, he says to his people that when I die, I want you to bury the Prophet's hair with me. Fill my mouth and my eyes with the Prophet's hair. You are killing the Sahaba of Rasulullah, the Ahlul Bayt of Rasulullah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Hasan, all of these family, the flesh of Rasulullah. You show enmity towards them, and suddenly the Prophet's hair, that was definitely fake as well. Fill my mouth with it? What kind of a weird concoction is that? But he's trying to project this image of religiosity, of love towards the Prophet, and so on. But of course, deep down was nothing but a filthy pagan. I saw a report the other day, meaning a hadith, and it said that Muawiya was selling idols to India. So there's like a deficit in the budget, and the government coffers, they need money. How do we fill that? Let's build idols and send them to India. And there were shiploads of idols being sent. And the person who narrates this, he says, where is this headed? They told him, India. Who's sending it? Who's selling it? Muawiyah is. So his friend told him, listen, shh, be quiet. Don't mention a word of this, otherwise Muawiyah will have you killed. So he's a pagan, he's an idol worshiper, but he says, fill my mouth with the Prophet's hair. And he plays all of these different parts at different times and different places. Anyway, one day he sends a letter to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He would always try to insult the Imam, and the Imam would respond to him. But as far as I know, I could be wrong, but as far as I know, there's only one place where the Imam said to him, I won't respond to you for this insult. The Imam would always set the record straight. But this one line of Muawiyah, the Imam said, you're not my guy. You're not the one I'm going to address this to. What did Muawiyah say? Muawiyah, it's a Nahj al-Balagha. We don't have Muawiyah's letter, but we have Amir al-Mu'mineen's response, and it includes portions from Muawiyah's letter. He says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, you're the one. Ajarak Allah, baqiyat Allah. He said to him, you're the one who was pulled to extract your pledge of allegiance the way a camel has a ring pierced through his nose and pulled with it. كالجمل المخشوش لكي تبايع. صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين يا أول مظلوم. The Imam responds to him. He says to him, O Muawiyah, أردت أن تذم فمدحت. You wanted to bring me down. You wanted to tarnish my reputation, but you just praised me. Because a man cannot be blamed for being oppressed. And I was oppressed on that day. When I was pulled out of my home in order to have the Pledge of Allegiance extracted, I was being oppressed. The Imam, in other words, doesn't deny what he said to him. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. I mentioned last night that Amir al-Mu'mineen in these last few days was going through a lot. But he especially became sensitive towards any woman who was oppressed, who was hurt. He would go to the marketplace. He would see a woman sitting in the scorching sun in midday. The Imam would go to this woman and say, what is wrong? Why are you sitting outside? Everybody goes to their home so as to shield themselves from the sun. What are you doing here? She said to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, my husband has thrown me out. So the Imam says, come with me, let's go to your home. If your husband has a problem with you, he has no right to do this to you. So the Imam went to that man's home. The man didn't recognize Amir al-Mu'mineen. And so when the Imam knocked on his door, he came out and he said, what's it got to do with you? If I wish to throw my wife out, I can do so. The Imam tried to reason with him. Then he pushed the Imam. He hit him on his chest and pushed him to the side. The Imam pulled out Dhul Faqar. He said, you oppress your wife like this. Wallah, if you don't let her to go back into the house, I will have your head. On another occasion, he saw another woman who was outside not knowing what to do. The Imam said to her, what's wrong? She said that my master has sent me to buy some produce, some fruits, some dates. And now I bought the dates. I went back to my master and he told me that these aren't good enough. Go back and exchange them. But the shop owner is refusing to exchange them. So the Imam went to the shop owner and once again made sure he put the fear of God into him. And it was in these last few days and nights of the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen that he received news that Muawiya had sent Busr ibn Artat to villages inhabited by Christian women and Jewish women, women who were Kitabi, Mu'ahid. They were living under the protection of the reign of justice of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Muawiya had sent his troops and they had stolen the women's bracelets. They hadn't killed any of them. They hadn't laid a hand on any of them. They simply stole their jewelry and their bracelets. Amir al-Mu'mineen goes, as soon as he hears this, he climbs the pulpit and he says that if a believer, I've been told this has happened, and if a believer hears this and dies from grief, ما كان عندي ملوما بل كان عندي راجحا. I wouldn't be shocked to hear that a person has died from grieving over the stolen bracelets of Jewish and Christian women. This is how sensitive Amir al-Mu'mineen was towards actions taken against helpless women. And perhaps this is why Allah tested him in this area, his most sensitive area, which is why when Muawiyah tells him that you were pulled like a camel from your home, Amir al-Mu'mineen simply told him, I will not speak to you about this. Why, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he buried Fatima al-Zahra, he lowered her into the grave. His beloved sweetheart, the trust of Rasulullah. As soon as he poured the dirt on his wife, the hadith says, Haja bihil huzn. He experienced an outpour of grief and pain. He burst into tears. He then looked in the direction of the grave of Rasulullah. He addressed the Holy Prophet. He said to him, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulallah wa ala ibnatika an-nazilati bijiwarik as-sari'ati al-luhuq bik. Peace be upon you, O Messenger, and upon your daughter who is your neighbor tonight. She's going to be your guest tonight. But she hurried to you so quickly, Ya Rasulullah. He then said to him, Ya Rasulullah, فأحفها السؤال واستخبرها الحال. Ya Rasulullah, when she comes to you, ask her what they did to her, because she never told me about their oppression. Fatima Zahra would always try to cover the side of her face, which was bruised from the slap of that animal. Fatima Zahra never told me about her broken ribs. Your daughter Fatima didn't tell me what they did to her side. الباب والجدار والمسمار. Amir al-Mu'mineen that said to the Prophet, Amma layli fasarmayad. Oh Rasulullah, I'll never be able to sleep from this time onward. وَلَيْلِكَ فَمُسَهَّدْ. I will forever remember your daughter and what they did to her, which is why when someone is on their deathbed, they say that they usually remember the biggest highlights of their lives. And sure enough, Amir al-Mu'mineen remembered when he was in the house, he then heard his wife cry out, not by his name, but the name of Rasulullah. يا رسول الله هكذا يفعل بحبيبتك. Then the next person Fatima called on to was Fidda. يا فضة فخذيني وإليك فأسنديني، فقد والله أسقطوا جنيني. Amir al-Mu'mineen is leaving this world tonight, surrounded by his children and his loved ones, but he cannot forget what happened to his wife Fatima Zahra, and he is so eager to meet her. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون، والعاقبة للمتقين. إلهنا بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها، عجل اللهم فرج إمام زماننا يا Allah. On these nights, one of the most recommended acts is to constantly pray dua al-faraj, dua afiyat al-imam al-hujjah. Dua is for the imam of the time especially, and it is after all the most important dua. If this dua is answered, all the others are also answered. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج، اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج، اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج والعافية والنصر. اللهم اجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه وأتباعه وشيعته ومقوية سلطانه. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا، اشف مرضانا، أد ديوننا، ارزقنا في الدنيا زيارة الحسين وفي الآخرة شفاعة الحسين. اللهم وارحم موتانا من مضى من هذا الجمع، وموتى المؤمنين والمؤمنات، العلماء الصالحين الشهداء، خدمة أبي عبد الله الحسين، إلى أرواحهم جميعا نهدي ثواب المجلس وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.